Oh, howdy, it's your old buddy Zoo. Now, I've received about 2 dozen of these XX handhelds over the last year, and even for someone that has mild hoarding tendencies, it's a bit much. So I've been trying to give away my XX handhelds as the year has gone on. Some of them I gave away on the YouTube channel, but a lot of them I gave away to my friends I have from real life. That's a weird notion, having friends in real life instead of online. I upgraded my buddy Sean's 351V to a 40XXV. I gave my buddy Jeff the original 35XX Plus, and I've got a 40XXH and a whole bunch of SPs on their way out the door as we speak. Now, it was while setting up my last few handhelds that I realized I had never done a custom firmware roundup for the XX line. And well, sir, since I got this sweet cowboy hat all the way from fancy Las Vegas, I figured it was about time. So come along with me as I go through all the custom firmware options for the XX line. You got MinUI, you got muOS, you got Knulli, and you got Rocknix. And I'm going to go through them with an eye towards giving away as gifts. Any of these can be tweaked pretty far if you're handy with the SD card, but not all custom firmwares are created equal when it comes to brand new users. So get saddled up and sit tight as we mosey through this custom firmware showcase for the 35XX. Yeehaw! First up is muOS. Now, I've done a couple videos on muOS, and me personally, it's my custom firmware for the XX line. I wasn't too high on muOS until the middle of 2024 though, but then I grabbed the Beans release, and I turned into a muOS stan. I think the thing I like the most is that it's different from a lot of the older firmwares. A lot of options out there are based on Emulation Station, or a minimalist Onion OS or a Garlic OS type deal, which is fine. But I was using Emulation Station back on Raspberry Pi, and for me at least, it's a little bit played out. Don't get me wrong, it's fine. It's still feature rich and it works great, but something about the muOS setup just kind of tickled my brain, and I've been all in for almost a whole year now. One of the things I like about muOS is that it has specific image files for pretty much every XX model, so you get something that's really well configured for your specific handheld. Take the SP for example. It comes with the correct shader you're going to want for most of your games. It comes with an on-screen bezel that actually fits the screen of the device, and it makes the SP feel more like a real SP. That's cool. Little tweaks and pre-configured stuff just make it a better overall experience. You can always go in and tweak stuff and change your cores if you want, but out of the box, you're getting a really good mix of configuration options without bombarding a newer user, or even an experienced user that just wants to play the damn game. muOS also has some mildly innovative features. My favorite is the Wi-Fi configuration. Even when I started to go all in on muOS, the Wi-Fi was kind of sketchy. You'd need to turn it off and on again, and probably half the times I started a game, I'd get one of those retro achievements, cannot connect error messages, and I'd realize that the Wi-Fi actually wasn't connected. muOS went a long way towards fixing that in their Banana release in the fall by adding general connectivity improvements and the ability to save your Wi-Fi configurations and hot swap them. So now if I'm at home, I can switch to my home network. If I'm out, I can toggle the save settings for my phone hotspot. This is relatively standard on Android handhelds, but it hasn't really been the case on Linux stuff until muOS. Now, someone's probably going to get in the comments to tell me how Rocknix has it as a quadruple nested feature that I missed, but with muOS, it's just there on the Wi-Fi screen. It's easy peasy. Speaking of mildly innovative, muOS makes it easy to watch TV on your handheld, which is kind of pointless, but it's also kind of awesome. You throw some text files in a folder, and you assign the TV core to it, and boom, you get to watch Old People's Court or Unsolved Mysteries.
Apparently sensing danger, Sanderson instructed Emily to back away.
Uh-oh. I bet it's a bomb. Yep. Tell you what, of all the Unsolved Mysteries I could have picked for this video, that was one of them. Anyway, let me know if you want a dedicated video on IPTV on muOS. It is a really cool feature. One issue I do have with muOS is there's no built-in scraper for box art, so you need to do it on the computer. They have image packs on their website, but it's still an extra step. I think a scraper is in the works. I feel like I've read about that. And development is really steady for muOS, so it might not be an issue going forward, but right now, there's no scraper. Speaking of no scrapers, next we're going to talk about MinUI. I set up MinUI on my 35XX Plus, and I've used it on handhelds I've configured for other people. It's minimalistic, which, MinUI, you'd kind of assume the Min stood for minimal, but the minimalist approach is actually pretty good for some of the XX handhelds that are limited by their controls. So like the 35XX Plus, or the SP, or the 28XX. Those would be good options because they lack an analog stick. MinUI doesn't really natively support N64, so putting MinUI onto a handheld without a stick, it just makes sense. That being said, MinUI on the 40XXV is legitimately awesome, just because you're essentially making a $50 to $70 analog pocket at that point, and something about that makes me happy. MinUI is also really good if you're going to give the handheld to a brand new user or maybe a kid. I ended up making an SD card with MinUI on a 40XXH I gave to my neighbor, but I also made a Knulli card for when he eventually wanted to expand into the world of box art and N64 and PSP and arcade and all that other stuff that MinUI doesn't have. Now, MinUI also allows you to just throw files on top of your stock card, so installation is super easy, and you don't even need a new SD card. Just use the one it's shipped with. Anbernic has done a pretty decent job. Let me go knock on wood. They've done a pretty decent job with their cards lately, so card failure really hasn't been an issue. With me, at least. I can't speak for everyone else. Maybe one day. Now, MinUI doesn't have Wi-Fi support or box art or a lot of the fancy options you'd see with other firmware, and that's by design. It's supposed to be minimalistic. But if you want retro achievements or pretty themes or box arts, MinUI ain't it. If you're looking for a minimalist approach, though, that's fine. That's the whole point. You can't get mad at MinUI for being min. That's the point. Now, our next two options really let you customize your experience, and they're a lot more complicated for a brand new user than muOS or MinUI. They really let you get into the nuts and the bolts of things. Speaking of getting into the nuts and bolts of things, I'd like to thank PCBWay for sponsoring this video. PCBWay is a one-stop shop for all your PCB needs, obviously. But they also offer 3D printing, CNC milling, and injection molding. That's right, you could conceivably build an entire retro handheld by yourself on that site. There's also tons of user-created items available on PCBWay, if that's your jam, including this fully open-source N64 flash cart, designed by some absolute Chad from Poland. Look at this thing. You can make your own EverDrive. That's amazing. That's amazing. Anyway, if you've got any interest in building or modding retro handhelds instead of just playing them, be sure to check out PCBWay today. That was weird. Anyway, up next is Knulli. I know I'm saying it wrong. Up until now, Knulli has been the de facto firmware you'd install if you wanted the emulation station experience. It's a fork of Batocera, so it's probably the most feature-rich custom firmware, for better or worse. Arguably, you get the best performance from these handhelds from Knulli, and you get a ton of configuration options, which you're going to need to squeeze out that very last drop of power from the H700 chip. You also get onboard art scraping, and arguably the best selection of themes, although muOS is no slouch on themes. Don't sleep on muOS's themes. Knulli also has an active development team and a ton of users in their Discord that can help you when you run into issues. And due to the increased complexity compared to the earlier options, you're probably going to run into some issues. Due to the emulation station interface, Knulli might be the best looking custom firmware out of the box. The default theme, Artbook Next, really draws you in from the start, and you have a ton more options in the theme repository, which you can select and install directly from the handheld. Once you dial in the settings you like, you can kind of lock it down and never really fiddle around again. That being said, the initial setup can be pretty daunting for a new user. I wouldn't recommend Knulli for a brand new user unless you're there, on site, right? You gotta be like hands-on to help with any sort of initial setup. It's not a set it and forget it kind of solution. I personally picked Knulli as the Cadillac option for the 40XXH I'm giving to my buddy Mr. Mike, but again, he lives next door, so I can go over and connect his Wi-Fi. I can make sure everything's running well. Maybe we can meet in the backyard. I'll help him assign a specific N64 core for a specific game. That's easy if you're there to help and you know what you're doing. But I wouldn't put Knulli on a handheld I was going to ship to a brand new user who lived 3 states away. You're just asking for trouble. Up last is the newest addition to the XX custom firmware line, Rocknix. Now, Rocknix used to be Jealous, and it's an old man in the custom firmware world. Like, I had Jealous on my Anbernic handhelds going back 3 or 4 years now. There was some drama that necessitated a name change, which is why they went from Jealous to Rocknix, and they ended up not supporting Anbernic devices after like the middle of 2023 due to some principled stands about GPL. So it was really surprising for me to see them reveal support for the full XX line in the last few weeks. Now, Rocknix doesn't have specific builds for specific XX handhelds. What they do have is a DTB file, and when you're done flashing your card, you pick the right DTB file, you put it on your root of your SD card, and then it becomes custom for your particular handheld. But it is an extra step. You got to make sure you do it right. Rocknix has a ton of similarities with Knulli because, they're both emulation station-based firmwares, but Rocknix has been around in our community in one permutation or another for a while. I don't know, it just feels kind of cozy to see that little ASCII Rocknix logo pop up in the bottom left of your screen when you turn it on. I don't know, maybe I've just been doing this for too long, but it's cozy, right? Much like Knulli, you're going to get a ton of optimization options, a ton of themes, and a huge community to help if you run into problems. Again, though, the first few days with the handheld could be way too complicated for a new user unless you're there to help. It's not insurmountable. A lot of us who've been in this hobby for a while, just went in completely blind and figured it out, but it is something to consider. Now, one issue I have with Rocknix, and it might be a me issue, it might be a skill issue, honestly, is that when you put your SD card into your Windows machine and you copy over files, it's way more of a pain than the other custom firmwares. If you're rocking a single SD card setup, getting your PC to recognize that one single card takes a couple extra steps, including some additional software you might have to download that allows Windows to read the X4 partitions. There's all sorts of ROMs folders on the card, like 3 distinct ROMs folders. It's confusing. And the transfer speed seems much lower, like 1 megabyte a second compared to like 20 megabytes a second with muOS. Rocknix is a hardcore Linux implementation, so these issues aren't really hidden. They're kind of embraced. They wear the Linux badge prominently on their dress shirts. You can get around it all by uploading your ROMs through a local Wi-Fi connection. And this is also an option with all the other custom firmwares besides MinUI. But it's really the only fast and reliable option to get your ROMs for Rocknix. For me at least. If you have a Linux machine, it's probably super easy. So those are my thoughts on the 4 major custom firmware options available for the XX line. And oh, by the way, stock OS is no slouch on here. I'm going to do a whole video on stock OS and the new user sometime, but today was about custom firmware. Here's where we would normally ask, what did we learn? But I think the question today should be, which one would I pick to use for a gift? Well, sir, I'm not going to beat around the bush on this one. I ended up going with muOS. If you download one of these minimalistic themes, you can get a lot of the simplicity of MinUI while still keeping the advanced features like Wi-Fi and the higher-end emulation that MinUI eschews. I actually went with the MinUified DMG Lite theme for these 35XX SPs just because it looks really sharp, it's easy to navigate, and it's relatively simple for a new user. Going with muOS also allows the person to grow a little as they get familiar with the handheld. After a month or two of a quasi-kids mode, maybe they'll want to change themes, or add new games, or tweak settings, and they'll be able to do that in a way that MinUI isn't made to do. On the other side, during that initial month or so, the minimalistic theme and pre-configuration you've done will allow them more of a new user environment than you can get with the emulation station-based firmwares. There will probably be a lot of people who disagree with me, but as someone who has set up a lot of these things for people of varying technical competencies, I think muOS with a minimalistic theme is really the way to go. Well, I hope you found this little custom firmware roundup helpful, especially if you're in my shoes and trying to give out retro handheld gifts. It's really an important part of growing the hobby. Everyone from all walks of life has at least a few special childhood memories of Nintendo or Sega or PlayStation, and these things really connect with them. I've given some of these to close friends, some to acquaintances, some to my neighbors, some to random local celebrities I've run into in real life or online, and I'm even making a retro gaming basket for my kids' PTA fundraiser at school this spring. It's not the 80s anymore, Pat. The jocks and the preppy girls like video games now. Being a nerd is kind of mainstream, so take your XX SP out at the bus stop, and you'll be surprised by how many people ask you about it. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. We're still grinding our way to 100,000 subscribers. I really want to get one of those stupid YouTube button things I can put in my living room, or heck, maybe I'll even hang it in my office at work. People will be very confused. Anyway, I gotta be getting back to the ranch, so we'll see you next time. Goodbye!